It's time for questions, and that is questions, not speeches, please. And let's get the discussion going.
How are you getting it through there? One big thing, you said you didn't come on to innovation, so if I can raise that. We see all the time. I was once in a quiz, and my specialist subject was Scottish inventions and innovations. You have no idea how big a subject that was. But we see all the time on our TV, Dragon's Den. We see a bunch of very overprivileged people with, albeit a few stupid ideas, but taking a whole pile of good ideas, screwing the people who have come up with them and that have built up their business from the start, and taking things. Why do we not have, as a nation, effectively a national Dragon's Den, where we're asking people to come to pitch, and obviously you're only taking good, productive ideas with potential. In return for that, we're taking a government share, and we're taking a golden share, which means that that company, as it grows, cannot then be sold out and export the jobs in Scotland. You could provide them with finance, which is usually very small in Dragon's Den, the finance element. What they're looking for is expertise, contacts, access. Now, surely as a country, we can supply that. Surely we can ask the companies already here to supply mentoring and such like. We can supply marketing expertise, patenting expertise, and all the rest of it. And we can take thousands of new ideas coming through Scotland. Take a share, take 10%, 15%, something realistic, not the 50% that they screw them for and that thing. No, all right, you might back 70% winners, 30% losers. That's fine, because there's enough. Do you think this is a viable idea?
Yes. Yes. No, don't cut off, because that's really interesting. There are a whole load of ways you can do this. What you've just described is largely what I've described as development banks. Those should be the Dragon's Dens, in association, working with a local authority. Now, this is a big answer, but we should have another layer of local democracy in Scotland, and that hyper-local. For example, we think we do tourism well. Don't do tourism well in Scotland. We don't encourage our domestic people to go. So that lowest level of local democracy would, for example, put together packages and promote tourism in a local area. There's a case for some mergers of the big local authorities if we did that. And you'd have an Ayrshire authority and a Lanarkshire authority. And they would then have a development bank and the economic development role. And incidentally, they would also potentially put the infrastructure in support. So the idea that you've got to put the Dragon's Den boys, they're all, I don't watch it, I can't abide it, but they're always looking for a way to get the export manager into their company. Well, I'm not suggesting they maybe don't need an export manager in the company. They need shared access to that. You could put the infrastructure in place. And that partnership between a local development bank and a local authority carrying the economic development and support role ought to be able, and incidentally, again, I didn't go into it, but a different banking model can take that share model. You take a share in the company, which means that you've absolutely got a long-term commitment to the company that you funded, and you can create that Dragon's Den model. They need money, they need expertise, they need support, and I know this is going to sound daft, but they need to feel loved. When you're going through, I'm sure many of you know, when you're going through an enterprise, building stuff up, it can be scary and lonely, particularly at moments when you're quite exposed, when you've got a lot of money out. And knowing that you've got people behind you that want you to succeed and are there to support you is important. So we could do it in a number of ways, but frankly, I would straightforwardly do that. I would straightforwardly say development bank, local authority, local areas, you go in and you pitch people good ideas. But just one other on that, the idea of innovation labs and hubs. We have a lot of bright kids coming out of our universities and schools. One of the things which I'm quite in favour of is we could set up a fund for innovative app development. So apps being phone apps or whatever. These are going to be a big, big way forward. We've been talking about this in open government. It's another project we're working on, where what you're doing is you're saying to people, have innovative ways of creating applications which help people better access public services and or do things in their society to help them out. Innovative, socially minded apps. And part of the point of that is you're creating an app developing community. These are important and valuable and profitable, and you're finding ways to stimulate them while also getting social value out of it. Dragon's Den's not right. It's not about the dog eat dog who wins. It's absolutely not about vulture. They say venture capitalism. It's not. It's vulture capitalism. It's absolutely not about that. But the principle is exactly right. Support, sustain, finance, help, grow, build, and do it in an environment where others can do the same.
Could you pass that on, Barry? Who was up here?
Thanks very much, Chair. I find Robin's stuff intensely interesting, and I'm a retired businessman or small businessman from Leith originally, and so I've gone through all of these problems that Robin's talking about, and he's absolutely certain that's true. Right now, I'm kind of a retiring councillor for the Independent People's Republic of Lochalie and Cardendane, but I'll be finished that soon. I've done a 10-year stint, but I'm so interested in what Barry was saying and yourself, because it's problems I've been talking about for years, except nobody bloody listens, you know. But it's the same thing happens. You talked about crisps earlier. Golden Wonder used to have a big factory in Livingston, I think it was, or Winchborough. Yeah, Broxburn it was, and we campaigned against it. But you see, the problem is we need an answer, Robin, and maybe you can supply it. You know, an entrepreneur builds up a company, and then he quite rightly wants to sell it on to glean the profit from that, and maybe make his family feel better. We need some sort of lock-in mechanism, as Barry's talked about. And it used to happen in Scotland. There was a company called Britoil, which was 50% private investment and 50% government, but the government had a golden share, and so they could stop things happening. Unfortunately, Thatcher got her hands on it and sold the whole bloody lot. But the theory is right. If we get Scottish Enterprise or Son of Scottish Enterprise to take an equity investment in a small entrepreneurial high-risk company, then we should use that equity as part of the conditions of the agreement that the company couldn't move out of Scotland or employment without the express consent of that share that's held by the government, or if you want, the Landspanki, which was a Finnish idea that you're talking about, really. They would have that power. So really, just how do we lock in entrepreneurs to sustain their business through generation to generation? Yeah,
right. This is really interesting because one of the examples that I use quite often is the fact that for the speckies out there, maybe we're not too old now, for the younger speckies out there, disposable contact lenses were invented in Scotland. They were invented in Scotland using money invested by the Scottish, by the Scotland office as then was, and they were all manufactured, all the world's disposable contact lenses were manufactured in Livingston. Now, that company is doing incredibly well. It's now making a hell of a lot of disposable contact lenses. I think it's in Portland, Oregon, because the guy sold out and the whole company with the IP left Scotland. And we've got no jobs out of that discovery whatsoever. Now, there's a number of factors here. We refer to this in industrial policy as anchoring strategies. It's to anchor anchoring businesses into the economy. It pains me when I see governments putting out press releases expressing success in the fact that some Scottish companies sold out. Wolfston Electronics,
Yeah, I worked with them, yeah.
Did you spun out of Glasgow University, global potential business, get bought over by an American venture company. I think it was an American venture company. Oh no, it was one of the big Japanese. And the Scottish government puts out a press release saying, brilliant. And I'm sitting there going, what do you mean brilliant? This is a catastrophe. We've lost another industry. Okay, anchoring strategies. One, you're right. Number one above all, change this stinking culture of business. Fucking Dragon's Den. If you look at the model which we should be following, it's the German Mittelstand. Now, for those that don't know it, the Mittelstand is a term for a strand of industry in Germany. It literally means middle-sized. But it means more than that now. Mittelstand enterprises are characterised by a number of things. First of all, they're family owned. And when I say family owned, it's multiple generations of family who own them. For a Mittelstand company, manager, owner, to not pass that company on to the next generation of his family is an embarrassment and humiliation. A sellout is a failure. Your job is to build a good business and pass it on. That's success. And that's what's admired. That's what your admiration for your success is, not how much you sold out for, but how well you built locally. Another key factor for that, which we can't do here, but there's always conditionality in the loans, is in Germany, of course, a third of the board is made up of employees. Now, you'll be unsurprised to hear that employees are much less prone, who are non-shareholders, are much less prone to selling out businesses. In fact, really interestingly, quite a number of Mittelstand companies have local community on the board. They are so rooted that the local community, they've been big employers in the area for 60 years, and they invite local community onto the board. Once again, it's an anchoring and rooting strategy that keeps them there.
But they'll sell shares to the employees and the directors.
They can sell shares, you can cooperative, you can social enterprise.
Sell them on. So it's not really...
Not if you do it right. This is another big problem that we've got in this country, and I would have mentioned this in innovation if I'd got a chance to get onto innovation. It's a bit bad that I missed innovation. There's about another 3 things as well, incidentally, which I just realised there I didn't get onto either, but I better not. But yes, absolutely. If you root and lock in, and you have the whole I didn't talk about social enterprise, I didn't talk about community enterprise, I didn't talk about cooperatives. All of these are important models. These can all have anchoring strategies. We don't have a Mittelstand tradition in the same way. And I'm not suggesting that we can simply replicate it, but we've got to try to get into that direction. And you can give shares to employees. But because we treat employees as virtually disposable commodities far too much in our economy, so we play as little as we can. And in Britain nowadays, we have contracts which mean we commit as little as we can commit to the employee. They have no return commitment. So if you're getting minimum wage and you have a choice of selling off employee shares, as I went, well, you go and get another minimum wage job somewhere. But if you're working in a business which is working for you, which is delivering for you, which is high skill, you don't sell up. You don't sell out your future 20 years of employment in a good job for the sake of a big cash bung. So the nature of the enterprises that we are building matters too. The other thing that's really interesting about Mittelstand is, and I saw this in a telly thing, they went around the car park with a camera and they said, right, pick the gaffer's car. Really interesting thing is that you couldn't. They're all driving BMWs because they pay their staff properly and they don't take insane amounts of money out. They're not constantly vampirizing, draining the life from their own business to buy yachts. They live a good life. They have a nice car. They have a nice house. They're not skint. They go on holiday. But they don't take everything out that they can. And we've got, the circular economy is used in our context. We've got what I call a sawtooth economy. Start a business, build it up, sell it. Use the money to start another business, or probably buy property, sell it. And it's like a sawtooth, up and down. You keep building, you make the equity all the way through. Good economy, good businesses take minimum. Surplus is good, right? Surplus is good. A business that creates a surplus is a successful business. A business that takes that surplus out as profit is a worse business than one that recommits the surplus back into the business. That circular model is what Mittelstands do. And Mittelstands are not small. An example, those that have got a pressure washer, it's probably, I can't really pronounce it, Kircher, they're a Mittelstand. Family owned for 50 years, everybody's well paid, really good industrial relations, really popular. I saw interviews with people, the boss doesn't have an office. The boss is based in a bit off the shop floor. It doesn't look like, I was going to swear there, it doesn't look like the people on Dragon's Den. Who's that awful Michelle Moan with her penthouse apartment and look at me. Doesn't look like her. Doesn't look like them at all. It's a different model. So there's a whole range of ways we can do this. Finance is the most obvious. We will give you money, but you're not selling up. And we will block it. And that's the deal for a publicly supported finance deal that helps you grow, and your give back is you stay.
Another question?
There's a lot of shit, I should go faster.
Someone will be good.
Just quick facts.
Just to follow on with what you were saying, and what do you think there's a need for legislation. I mean, too often it seems to me we're just delighted to get factories or employees to come here because of the jobs, and really there's no stipulation on them to do anything. And one thinks of West Lothian and the Silicon Valley. They were a lot of those companies were given huge grants to come and set up factories here, and then when they discovered, labour in China was cheaper, they're up and off, and there was no penalty. Whereas I think in France and Germany, those factories, there would be a penalty if they just cleared off, and there were each worker that was made redundant got a decent payoff. Whereas in Scotland, they were just made redundant and that was it. So I think, we need to have much more. I think government's afraid of making legislation because they're so desperate to get industry to come. They'll offer them anything.
It's not even legislation. This is just contractual deals if you get the money. Now, first of all, there was an episode of Sherlock which said something, but Benedict Cumberbatch, in which some guy was playing an evil multinational and he said something that was really important, because it actually was really important. He said, I'm coming over to take over the economy of Britain, and if that works, I'm going to go to a proper country and try it there too. Now, what they meant by that is Britain is ideologically in the West only after the United... In fact, we are more prone, more spineless in our engagement with multinationals even in America. America's much firmer as an open market. They're supposed to be the biggest open market. No, they're not. We are. We're pathetic about it. Please, big corporation, come over here because you'll make us look all shiny and new with your big warehouse. Oh, you want to leave? Well, it was fun for 5 years, thanks. We're a pushover. We don't put conditions in things. We throw money at people, and it's a stupid idea anyway. This was all very well in previous eras. So Silicon Glen, we had a skills advantage. So it just so happened that at that time we had a large volume of people who were capable of mid to higher skilled, mostly sub-university jobs in plant assembly. Now, we attracted companies to come, and there were financial inducements, but the biggest inducement was the skill set of the workforce. Now, that's fine. You want companies to come here because of our assets. If you're bribing them to come from low cost, number one, they're almost certainly the wrong kind of company. Yeah. A company that relocates for a fiver here and a fiver there is not the company you want, because they're clearly low margin. And second of all, just throwing money at them, they come. Is it what you want? So, I mean, obviously, we're not going to beat Amazon. They were coming anyway. But if you didn't give that 10 million to Amazon, what could you have done with it? You could have done other things with it. Inward investment has become one of the most misunderstood concepts. It's what I was saying about the China stuff. If we have a company that wants to come to Scotland, because for whatever reason it is, it's identified something in Scotland that we have that will help it do something good and productive and create jobs and wants to stay here, we should bite their hands off. Absolutely, we should invite them over. If they want to come here because they've noticed that we've got an asset which they can exploit instead of us, such as our wind power, well, we should ask ourselves, can we do it ourselves first? If the answer is no, fair enough, but we can do it ourselves first. We shouldn't be trying to coax them in. In fact, we should be trying to coax them out as far as we can. And if you have got people whose sole purpose is rent-seeking and asset stripping, China deal number 3, we should have people at the airport to hit them with sticks, right? So we've got inward investment is great if it's real investment, and you can tell if it's risky, it's real. And if it's risk-free, it's rent-seeking. No more attracting risk-free investment, which comes here, takes wealth, goes away again, and it can't fail, and we're subsidising it. There was no risk in Amazon building a warehouse. We were not going to stop shopping in Amazon. They shouldn't have got a penny, and we should have been using that money to support Indigenous business.
Jan, could you pass the microphone along? Could we take 2 or 3 questions before you answer? So,
Hi, Robin. Some really good ideas tonight, and I think a lot of them are quite contingent on finance. I work for one of these large banks and do balance sheet management, looking at the corporate balance sheet, and done a lot of research actually looking at German banks and how they finance things. So it kind of comes back to the Scottish National Investment Banking, kind of seems to be key to some of the ideas we've discussed. Might not be popular in this room, but I'm quite frustrated, I think, with some of the economic policy from the SNP or lack thereof. What do you think is the key barrier to them actually progressing this idea of a Scottish National Investment Bank? Why are they not looking at this or going forward with it?
Thank you. Just,
I'll come
we
back.
have another question.
I'm going to take a couple.
Just pass it along. We'll just take a couple.
I don't think the Scottish enterprise is an accident. I think it's what it does is a very accurate reflection of how people think about local development. And I think if you were to ask any of the councillors in any of the big cities, they wouldn't say what you say. They would say what they think, which is mainly wrong. How does that change? How do we get something as simple as make not buy, which is what you're saying, conventional wisdom instead of let's give Amazon a lot of money?
I wonder if you see a possibility of a Scot coin in any of this to stimulate local. And the other thing, I wonder if you could maybe say something about the trains, and I think there's another criticism would be made of our party there, this Dutch company.
Okay.
Well, can I take the state? Let's do that in reverse order then. We actually produced a paper on creating a Scottish currency, which would have stuck £1 billion into the Scottish economy. Now, I explained how you would do it at a national level. The Treasury would probably try to block that, saying that we don't have the power to run a currency. You can do it on a local basis. There's some merit in this. It's certainly in the realm of experimental. So I'm not against. Frankly, what I'd like to see us do is, number one, become bloody independent. Number two, get a proper national Scottish currency put in place, underpinned by a strong central bank, integrated with an investment bank, and incidentally also pension funds. I didn't go into any of that, but so I'm not against. I don't think it's a solution. It has been shown to be best a solution in local areas with the more severe problems. So you can use it. The Brixton pound was an example where it was used in an area, a tight area, for a specific regeneration purpose, and there's been quite a lot of success with that. New Economics Foundation, if you're interested, has done quite a lot of work on that. I'm not against. I would, if I was expending my risk capital, it's not the one I'd pick. I think there's other things. But however, I avoided this in this talk because it's often seen as being the kind of crap the lefties always say. There's a strong case for saying there's a whole bunch of infrastructure in society which you would organise better and it's better for the economy. Trains, comms, housing, these basics. So housing not being a wealth extracting, but even if you just make it places to live, you immediately have economic benefit, because people's money's in their pockets, not flying into a bank. They're then spending. So housing, if we got our housing market right, that would be an economic boom just in itself. If we got our transport running on a non-profit basis, once again, it becomes a more effective economic tool because of what it does in terms of not extracting wealth. You also get to, actually punish people properly for not being able to manage the train system. And the same with power. We can definitely say the same with power. We're working on some proposals again just now for the nationalisation of the grid, not of the generating companies, but of the national grid, so you can plan and organise power once again for development purposes rather than for profit-making purposes. And one that I would add is, I'm rural area, broadband. How are we going? I didn't touch broadband because it just makes me angry. How are we going to develop disaggregated businesses? Remember what I was talking about, right-sized production? You don't need a city with a factory anymore. You can disaggregate production and design. You could have And the most remote village in Scotland, a cluster of incredibly high-tech companies producing design prototypes using 3D printers, emailing the data to China, to Spain.
They each split right up.
And spread round.
Benati, Balindi, can I have 50 jobs from the tax office?
Yep.
With the communications that they have.
Yep. We put out today, I hope people saw that we fixed the deficit. Hooray. So Commonwealth published a paper today. A large part of that is that GERS was not measuring the economic impact of relocating civil service jobs to Scotland. Now, the tax revenue from that is certainly over £1 billion. Could be over £2 billion, simply because all these civil servants come up here. And I've said it for a while, since we own an airport in Prestwick, I think the obvious place to put the Foreign Office is Cumnock, so that folk can see actual Scotland when they come off the plane and they come over to the Foreign Office. But yes, we can plan and disaggregate to get to different places. Why doesn't this kind of thinking happen? I am sorry to say that Britain is a combination of utterly conventional and utterly craven, and I'm afraid Scotland's no better. I can't tell you who, but I was talking to a senior civil servant in the realm of economic development, a senior public servant in the realm of economic development, and I was complaining a bit about the state of things, and the answer I got was, well, remember that nobody in public realm in the civil service gets rewarded for taking a risk or trying something new. Everybody gets a good bonus if they do precisely what they did the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before. So we have the most pathetically risk-averse public realm who does the same thing it always does. It is beyond me that it is a serious part of the current Scottish Government's economic development that you're going to reorganise some quangos. Merging quangos is what you do when you've run out of every other mundane thing to do. It never works, never does anything. You can design new organisations, but merging quangos to do the same thing is make-busy nonsense. I get very frustrated with this. Scotland is filled with first-rate civil servants. A lot of muppets as well, but that's the same as any industry, as any sector. There's some really bright people, and they're frustrated because they don't get rewarded, they don't get encouraged to try and take these chances, and we do not have, remember what I was saying about the infrastructure. Run me through Scotland's think tanks, and how many of them produce actual papers? We try really hard to produce practical, feasible papers. Now, I'm a fan, I'm a pluralist, so I might be in the left, but I think it's good that we've got right-wing think tanks as well. And I think it's good that we've got Reform Scotland, but they just put out press releases. They don't put out proposals for the economy. And the IPPR, they have discussions in the conferences, that's great. But we aren't exactly flooded with thinking. Scotland has poor thinking infrastructure. Our universities are not geared towards the public realm. They do not. Our universities are not geared to thinking about Scotland. They think in Scotland, but not about Scotland. We do not have think tanks. We do not have an adventurous civil service. Our agencies are phenomenally well paid. The average salary in Scotland is 25,000. The average salary in Scottish Enterprise is 37,000. Phenomenally lucrative to do bugger all repeatedly, time and time again.
You there. Could we move on to the...
And to the last question at the back.
No, there's another two questions.
Oh, well, look, can I just pick up the Scottish National Investment Bank? I'm going to say I am really disappointed. It took the Scottish Government less than 2 weeks to write back and reject our proposals for Scottish National Investment Bank, and they didn't even take up our offer of a half-an-hour meeting to talk about it. They just sent a letter saying no thanks. I'm not making... Right, so we're clear, I think there's... right, I'm careful being live. I think that the Scottish Government is not going in the right direction in the economy. I don't think at the heart they've done the analysis bit. That's my problem. I think if you said to the Scottish Government just now, what's wrong with the Scottish economy, they wouldn't give you an answer. And I firmly believe that if you want to work on something, you've got to understand how it ticks, how it works. Like if you want to fix a clock, you've got to know what the cogs are. I don't think they've done an analysis of the economy, and that means that I think that they tend to want to just repeat again and again. Now, I think this is a shame. And at Scottish National Investment Bank, at the very least, I think they should have put that for proper exploration. set a committee up and said, let's have a look at this. I think knocking it back in under a fortnight was a mistake. And if the few good ideas which are properly worked up, and I say again, thank you enormously to the New Economics Foundation, who we work very closely with. They've had discussions with Treasury to get us over the legal barriers that are contained in starting a Scottish National Investment Bank. And we did all that work and took it to government, and you just think, God, that took us 6 months. Why did we bother? There is this balance between poor thinking, lack of innovation, and let's be honest, Scotland's a small country and there's too much clientelism. So if you're already a big business, you have a lot more access than we do. I'm working with a number of groups, so I think it'd be okay to name them. People like Scottish Urban Regeneration Forum, the New Economics Foundation, Scotland's Towns, which is focused on regeneration of the towns, Nesta, which is an innovation agency, Community Enterprise Scotland, Social Enterprise Scotland, Oxfam, that does a lot of economic development work, a bunch of individuals, Engender, Friends of the Earth. We all have conversations, and all of us said the same thing. We might get listened to on poverty, we might get listened to on climate change, we can't get listened to on the economy. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Scotland's big business. And if we knock on the door, we don't get in. And what we've been discussing is whether we could form a coalition, a New Economy Coalition, a New Economy Alliance, what we're going to call it. And we're still in these discussions, so that we could create a critical mass of this thinking, which it would be harder to ignore. Now, the fact that that's as far as our ambitions got there tells you a little bit of the frustration. If it was just harder to ignore us, that'd be a step forwards. The other thing that is that I've said this so often. I spent 12 years as a lobbyist, a political lobbyist for the university sector. And one of the things I said was a continuing problem is that whenever Scotland does something, it gets all, inverted commas, the players round the table. And what do you know? The players are the banks and the airports and a couple of the big manufacturers and the CBI. And they seem to see the future as being another version of their present. And I always said this, so who sits around the tables and argues for nanotechnology which doesn't exist? Who sits around the table and argues for renewable energy technologies which aren't happening in this country? So if we keep designing the economy based on the current players, how do we devise an economy which is good for the new players? Now, lobbying is becoming a problem in Scotland. It's been building up and we've had more and more of it, and it isn't helpful and it isn't the best way to do the thinking. And in truth, I rather fear now that where we've got to is that we're going to have to get the independence referendum out the way before Scotland will develop a spine. And once we've got that out the way, I pray that once we get that out the way, that the energy which has gone into both the discipline and the work to get towards independence will move somewhere else. And it will move into innovative thinking about what the new Scotland is like. It's really exciting when you start to do it. I so wish I could talk to you about some of the things we've been discovering in the White Paper Project and what you could do afterwards. But I'm afraid we're in paralysis in Scotland. We're stuck. We're partisan in the Parliament. We are waiting for the next lead on independence. We're not rocking the boat, including me. I thought about putting a slightly pissy press release out saying disappointed investment bank's been knocked back. And then I just thought, that's just going to be another criticism of government, and I better just suck it up and not put that out, because there's going to be fights that we need to fight on other things. And so you don't put that out and you don't get the thinking. And I do lots and lots of SNP meetings, lots of constituencies invite me to go and talk, and every single time I mention Scottish National Investment Bank, everyone says, brilliant, let's do that. And they all think that it'll be met with open arms, and it's not, and it's a disappointment. So there are many, many reasons that I'm committed to Scottish independence, and freeing us to think like we're not Britain is one of them. We still think like a region. And I'm sick of thinking like a region.
Subordinate, independent.
Dependent. It's not just that. We've absorbed the dumbass business culture of Britain, which is not a successful economy.
and are judged in that.
We're measured against
we're
these
judged
things.
as an independent nation.
And there's another, among the many things that I talk about is at what point, and I'm the commie here, right, as I'm the lefty, at what point did we stop measuring the economy in terms of productivity, innovation, balance of trade and exports, and instead start measuring it in terms of house prices, footfall in the high streets and banking profits? Now, this is because if you measure the UK's productivity, it's woeful, innovation rates are embarrassing, balance of trade, well, if we even talk about that out loud, there'll be a run in the pound. So the old fundamental measures of the economy make Britain look like a mess, because Britain is a mess. And so nobody talks about it, except for, incidentally, the best place, the most radical thinking in public in Britain just about now is the Financial Times. Because the Financial Times knows where the bodies are buried. And if you go and read the Financial Times, they're the one paper which is actually saying this balance of trade thing could be a serious problem if anybody notices how much of Britain's money's flowing out and how little's flowing in. And we're not addressing this. I just wish Scotland would stop thinking like a region, and I just wish we'd stop thinking like we're British.
Exactly. Well, I've got a question for you. Do you ever sleep?
No. I'm going to say.
Okay, I promise you. Last question.
Well, 2 bits. First of all, HMRC produce statistics for every quarter, giving the balance of trade of all the, we'll say, regions of the UK: Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and 9 English regions. Now, Scotland is in surplus, so is Northern Ireland, usually, and so is Wales. The area which has the deficit is England, but that's never mentioned. One thing I was going to say, in France in the 50s, they had an institution called the Commissariat du Plan, and it was to get people to get together. For example, if I decide to export beer to Germany, it would be mentioned, so I couldn't afford an agent to go to Germany, so all small companies would get together and we do it together.
Mm-hmm. Collectivity of scale is how you do things if you're facing collectivity of power in multinationals. And you're right, we do balance of trade figures. This is the problem. If you read the small print, they're utterly indicative. There's no actual guarantee that you can track the flows of money in and out.
It's just a line. They say that oil isn't included in it, so Scotland's doing very well. But I don't know what the actual makeup of the bottom line is.
We actually spent some time in this recently, because when we started to do the project that we just put out today, the Beyond Years, we sat down to try and work out, are we undervaluing Scotland's exports? I have a strong suspicion that far too much of the economic value of whisky is being recorded in London. Yeah. So remember that all whisky is traded out of London, and I have a terrible feeling that somehow we are being treated as a wholesale export and that London is capturing the retail export value. So we tried to find out a number of these things. We tried to look at balance of trade, and we read a number of articles and analysis, and it turns out that the balance of trade numbers, they're indicative. They don't tell you anything real. So even trying to work out how much income tax is paid by people who work in Scotland, but whose head office is based in England, we don't know. We don't know the number.
The corporation tax of Tesco is down in Cheshunt. Yeah. It's something which is taken from the Scottish economy.
Transfer pricing is a mechanism by which tax is avoided and value is allocated by the multinational to different parts of the world. So the invoices which go through which record trade, right, the value of the trade that comes in and the value of the trade that comes out is declared by the producer. That value is a transfer price. It's not the purchase price. It's not the production price. So it's not Scotland that is balance of trade figures are crap. It's UK.
Yeah, and that's true as well.
And Deanne Julius, who was on the board of governors of the Bank of England, headed a group that tried to figure out what the balance of trade would be in the U.S. And it turns out it's not in deficit in the U.S. It's hugely in surplus.
Yeah, and you know why? The U.S. doesn't allow transfer pricing.
No, it's because the renomination of the flows, so it looks like, if you look at the balance of trade and the statistics in the States, they're as misleading as anywhere else in the world, because
Okay, I was going to talk about the measure. I'm hearing in the corner here that we're going to have to get off, but just to say that this is what I was saying earlier on about America being much more aggressive for this stuff. America measures on the best estimate of economic activity in the country. It doesn't work on the basis of the top line in the accounting sheet, ignoring all the lines of accounts, fiddles all the way up. The US is much more aggressive at trying to capture. It's not perfect, but it's much more aggressive at trying to capture the value. It's on the way down as well, but it's much better at this. Incidentally, we just looking at the tax gap, we reckon that's one of the things which an independent Scotland could do quite well, is simply preventing the double Irish, that tax transfer price leaking. And if anyone's interested in how, it is perfectly legal to tax a corporation in the following way. You tax it on the basis of its international profitability, which it can't hide from its shareholders, proportionate to the in-country trade. So if Amazon is making 2% of its entire company's trade in Scotland, you tax it on 2% of its global turnovers, not its domestic trade, and they cannot transfer that because their shareholders would not permit them to depress the real profitability of the company, and you can't hide it.
That's the California system.
Yep.
And it's Washington.
Yeah. Scotland should be. We're working on a paper in this for the tax code for the white
You
paper.
talked about a double Irish. I think I need a double Scotch. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and enjoying this incredible man's wonderful exposition. A bit depressing in places, but inspiring. As I say again, I don't know what Robin does for sleep, because he generates more ideas before breakfast than most of us do in a week, or a lifetime.
I collect other people's ideas.
Yes.
That's all.
Well, so thank you, everybody, and Chris will.